You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the associate editor and columnist for the Financial Times, Stephen Bush, and the contributing editor at the Times and Sunday Times, Cindy Yu. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage is quoted in The Express, insisting the government's pledge of £100 million to tackle the small boats crisis isn't enough. While former Labour leader Lord Kinnock has urged Chancellor Rachel Reeves to charge VAT on private health schemes to fund NHS services. The Financial Times focuses on the ongoing fallout from Donald Trump's decision to sack the government official in charge of employment data because he wasn't happy with the latest set of US jobs figures. The Daily Mail has an exclusive report that shows that asbestos in poorly maintained military accommodation and vehicles has killed 9 times more military veterans than there were British victims of the Taliban during the Afghan campaign. Millions of drivers could be handed a share of a multi-billion-pound compensation package after the city regulator said it would open a redress scheme for consumers affected by the car finance scandal. That's on the front of The Guardian. The Star reports on the death of a fan at last night's Oasis concert at Wembley Stadium. That's also on the front of tomorrow's Sun. The Metro speaks to the daughter of a pensioner who is terrified of rodents and has complained of finding rat droppings in her hospital room in Kent. And the Mirror has thanked readers who stepped up to donate blood amid a national shortage. They report that within a week of their appeal, 100,000 people booked appointments to give blood, 29,000 of them for the first time. So we are joined tonight by Stephen Bush and Cindy Yu. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Metro, going inside the Metro newspaper, and this story regarding Yvette Cooper and the announcement that £100 million of extra funding is being ploughed into cracking down on the small boats crisis and illegal immigration. Stephen.
Yeah, so this is something that the government believes that if it can't fix, then they are going to be in real trouble politically at the time of the next election. In the here and now, it's obviously creating a lot of pressure on the areas and are being asked to host people while they are being processed. So the theory here is that you spend £100 million more on cracking down on these gangs, but also, crucially, you spend that money on this deal with France to effectively say, look, if you come here via a small boat, you'll be sent straight back to France, and as an exchange, the United Kingdom will take someone who stayed in France and has filled out a process, had a process that is formal and
that's
legal.
The one in, one out.
That's the one in, one out policy. Now, of course, it is, as I say, it's politically vital for the government, and they do something that fixes this issue. What has worked to reduce numbers in the past has been deals with the countries that are where people are coming from. So the deal that Rishi Sunak struck with Albania, the deal that the EU struck with Libya. So I actually think the most important, the detail which will give the government most hope are those arrangements with people in the Middle East, Africa and Asia, because it's ultimately the question of its source. So not what happens when someone's got to Paris, but what happens before they, even get to Europe.
And also the pledge is to tackle the online trade of the smugglers, the people smugglers. Yes,
exactly. So Yvette Cooper is saying that anyone who advertises illegal channel crossings or fake passports on social media will be punishable by up to 5 years in prison, even without any evidence that they actually have been engaging in people smuggling. So it's just about widening the net of people who are even engaging in that kind of, producing that kind of advertising will already be punished for it. Because, frankly speaking, a lot of this stuff is so nebulous and so grey, and a lot of the smugglers are not based in the UK. It's very, very hard to actually bring punishment towards them. I think the devil's in the detail with this one. As Stephen says, the return schemes will be very good, but it doesn't sound like this £100 million is really focused on that particular element of things. So the question really is this just Labour's own version of the Rwanda scheme, as it were, much more palatable, but ultimately a way to buy time so that politically this issue becomes less salient rather than, banging on their doors right now.
In any event, though, Stephen, Nigel Farage is claiming in The Express that £100 million simply isn't enough to stop the small boats crossings.
Well, I'm reminded of Mandy Rice-Davies's, well, he would, wouldn't he? I mean, it would be surprising if Nigel Farage were to throw his hands up and go, actually, the government's doing a great job.
But is he right? Does he have a point?
It's really hard to say. As I say, the things which have successfully reduced numbers in the past have been deals with partner countries, and there's been some success in smashing the supply side, i.e. the gangs. That is not something that this government has yet succeeded in, but it may be that an extra 100 million, which obviously is not a great deal of money in the grand scheme of government spending, obviously a huge amount of money to all of us, but in terms of what the government spends, it's nothing at all. It feels to me unlikely that the money is going to be what shifts it. If something does, it will be this additional criminalising of people involved in the trade, and this one in, one out deal with France. That, I think, has the potential to be much more significant than any extra money.
Nigel Farage is saying that the numbers of illegal immigrants are what amount to a national security crisis at present. Do you think that's the general feeling?
Well, that is a very effective message that Reform are majoring on, that these illegal migrants, when they come to the UK, they threaten security inside the country. This also comes at the weekend as 2 Afghan illegal migrants have been charged over the rape of a 12-year-old girl. And so the Reform message is that these people coming over, they're not safe. And actually what's interesting is that a lot more voters, especially female voters who previously had not really been, interested in Reform on the Nigel Farage message in general, are now starting to be worried from this kind of sexual assault element here. And so that is the kind of the hidden message, the dog whistle, if you like, of the national security message here. But again, as Stephen says, compared to Nigel Farage's own, tens of billions of pounds shortfall in the Reform budget, it's unclear what his alternative really is, other than to throw some more money in. And because he is also throwing money at similar problems but that he says hypothetically when he becomes Prime Minister, he wants to do too.
Stephen, let's turn to the eye, and Lord Kinnock, previous Labour leader, is saying that charge VAT on private health to fund the NHS. That's his advice to Rachel Reeves. This is following on from VAT on school fees as well, so follow that model.
Yeah, I mean, look, so the big picture politics here is that we all know that the financial position of the government has got worse since the last budget, and they're going to have to plug that hole somewhere. I think we all saw over the last couple of weeks that Labour MPs are clearly not going to be happy with that being plugged by more spending cuts, so it's going to have to be tax rises. I think this suggestion is one that is unlikely to be one that finds favour with Rachel Reeves. Unlike people who've chosen to privately educate their children, which is something a very small minority of us do, and that was a very popular tax rise, whatever one thinks of it individually, for most people they were in favour of that. I think the problem with charging VAT on private health schemes is you have a lot of people who've been forced to go private because they've waited for such a long time for their NHS procedure. I think the politics of it lands quite differently if you're effectively turning around to someone saying, well, because you've had to wait 18 months, we're now going to charge you more on your taxes to getting this procedure that you need to be able to walk again healthily for. I just think this is something the government will want to stay very far away from, because they think, loads of places you can't get an NHS dentist. What, so the government's going to charge you extra tax because you're not using the non-existent public service? I think that's a non-starter.
Cindy, do you agree with Stephen on that?
Yeah, and I think aside from the political messaging being confused, I think it would also be counterproductive, because private healthcare, whatever you might think of it, does alleviate the pressure on the NHS as well. These are people who are not on the NHS waiting list because they're paying for their own healthcare. So what will someone who does that currently do when VAT is levied? Probably go back to the NHS and make the current waiting list even worse. And also the NHS itself uses private healthcare when it comes to some elective surgery. So it's just not clear that actually this would alleviate pressure on the NHS, and that the tax revenue raised would actually really go that far in solving the NHS's problems.
To the Telegraph, Stephen, and some blue-on-blue aggression, I think it might be described as. Liz Truss is saying that Kemi Badenoch is not telling the truth about Tory failures. What's brought this about?
Well, so also in the Telegraph, Kemi Badenoch said, well, the problem is Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves talk a lot about Liz Truss, but they're making the same mistakes as she's done. The first time that Kemi Badenoch has indicated that she thinks there was any problem with those 49 days of Liz Truss, although she didn't, of course, say why. Liz Truss has hit back going, well, actually, no, I was fine. The problem was about other things in the government. I think The problem here for Kemi Badenoch is twofold. Firstly, because her political position is so weak, everyone in the Conservative Party is now talking about, when, not if, she's got rid of. Which means that something which I think would have been very helpful at the start of her leadership, which was to repudiate that Truss experiment, which did so much damage to the Conservative Party's reputation for economic competence, continues to do damage to the United Kingdom, right? We still pay a higher premium on our debt, in part because of that moment when we signalled to the international money markets that we weren't serious people. I think Badenoch is exactly right to try and disavow that moment, but she's waited too late, and I think I think we're going to see a number of things where she's going to try and reset the mood music around her leadership, but I do think it's too late, because at the point that you're in a credibility off with Liz Truss, things have got bad for you.
Well, Liz Truss is saying it's disappointing that instead of serious thinking like this, Kemi Badenoch is instead repeating spurious narratives.
Yeah, but the problem with the serious thinking that Truss is talking about is blaming Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings for the lockdowns, blaming Rishi Sunak for the profligate COVID spending, which furlough scheme, by the way, much less profligate than some of Truss's own spending pledges, one might argue. And so it seems like Truss is saying, don't just attack me as a former Prime Minister, you've got to attack all my predecessors too, which is never a good sign of someone who is kind of confident in, well, Truss is confident in her position, clearly, but it's never, a good sign of the legitimacy of your argument to say what other people are even worse.
But Liz Truss is attacking, the 14 years of Tory leadership, of which she was a part, and she's criticising that entire period now.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the problem for parties when they're defeated often, right? They decide that the reason why they lost was that they were a sufficiently extreme version of themselves, and then they kind of move away from where the voters are, and then they usually go down to a worse defeat than the one they had the first time around. We saw that story play out with the Labour Party quite a lot over the last 14 years. We're clearly at the moment seeing that play out with the Conservatives. I think the added problem, though, of course, is for the first time there is a serious and viable party on the right called Reform, who, if you're a disgruntled Conservative voter, you have somewhere else to go. And I think, it is, as Cindy says, really damaging for the Conservative Party to have a situation where she's basically saying it wasn't just the 49 days that were bad, all 14 years were a disaster. And you're never going to repair your party's reputation, if you're a Conservative, if you go around telling people that you were awful and then it was all bad. It's
not team player behaviour, as it were. If I were a Conservative, I'd be pretty annoyed about, she has no skin in the game anymore. Of course, she wants to protect her legacy and her reputation, but Badenoch is not the main reason that people remember Truss badly, and so it's rats in the sack at this point.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would describe Liz Truss as a team player. Stephen and Cindy, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, will supporters of the controversial Palestine Action Group overwhelm police at protests next weekend? We'll be discussing that next. Stay with us.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C.
Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology?
The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power.
It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News.
I want to be treated equally like everyone else. It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
The question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Stephen Bush and Cindy Yu. Let's take a look at the Telegraph and this story, Palestine Action Plot to Swamp Police. This essentially is the banned organisation, Palestine Action, testing the law. And there's a call for a demonstration in support of them in London.
Yeah, and so, as we all know, the United Kingdom has not built and did not build enough prisons for the last 14 years. And at the same time, we were continually increasing the number of sentences. So we had there's fewer people, but they were in there for longer, so prisons are almost full. The theory of this demonstration is that you can effectively subvert this declaring of Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation, because if enough of you turn up, well, then there ultimately aren't enough jail cells to put you in. This has been the thing which, since they came into office and inherited this problem, this is the thing which has been keeping ministers in the Justice Department up at night, is this fear of something like this happening. Now, the hope in the government will be that it's one thing to turn up to a meeting where you discuss this, but of course the thing that everyone involved knows is that if not enough of you turn up, then actually, you haven't successfully forced the issue, you're just going to prison. But I mean, this does speak to the bigger problem that we have got to get serious about building and increasing our prison capacity again. We can't have a sort of repeat of the 14 years we've just had of kind of going, oh, well, we like this in theory, but someone complains when a prison is built near them, so it gets delayed, and in the end it doesn't happen. Because as this story shows, when you're in that position, it means you can't enforce the law anymore.
Yes, Sir Keir Starmer is battling a 25-year High Court backlog and, as you say, the chronic shortage of prison spaces.
Yeah, well, I think the wider issue here, I mean, Stephen is of course right that this is a way to effectively force the government's hand, and actually that the government should have more resilience in the system than that. But the wider question for me is whether or not, how remarkable this prescription of Palestine Action really is. It's the first time the protest group has been prescribed for being a terrorist group just for criminal damage, without any violent intent or harm to human life. And so that is a real milestone moment. And actually, there's a reason that the High Court is taking a hearing of the challenge to this prescription in autumn this year. It's not incredibly clear that this is, great for freedom of speech, that actually just because you believe in supporting Palestine and obviously have taken criminal damage actions to do it, that is really what we understood terrorism to be. And so this is still, in my mind, quite arguable whether or not there's not a freedom of speech infringement more at the crux of this issue.
Stephen, would you agree with that? Or has the case been sort of tested?
Well, the case is going to be further tested at the High Court. I think Cindy's right to say that there is an open question about whether or not it's clear that the government's use of this power, which wasn't used, for example, against the women at Greenham Common, who famously did criminal damage in their protests against various bases and various things in the 1980s. However, I think there are two important principles here. There's the question of whether or not the UK government has made the right decision in terms of Palestine action, which is being tested in the courts. But there's also the, I would say, more important question, because it's the first duty of the state, is whether or not you actually can have a functioning criminal justice system. That is, because if you don't have a functioning criminal justice system, you don't have anything else, essentially.
It's pretty important.
Indeed. The Guardian, I think, will be our final paper. Millions in line for payout over this car finance mis-selling scandal. Well, several billions of pounds, up to 18 billion, still to be perhaps claimed by people, Cindy.
Yeah, but, if you're an individual involved in this, your payout is probably no more than £950, says the regulator. And this, of course, comes after car dealers generally did not have to disclose that they were giving people financing deals where they got a higher commission from, even though the buyers also had to pay higher interest for. So clearly a conflict of interest there, only ended in 2021 and was since been disclosed. The question here is whether or not, A, for the individual victims, £950 is not a lot of money, especially if it's much more that you put into your car on this. And the second question politically is whether or not Rachel Reeves, at this sensitive economic time, would really want to be doing this, which would require banks to pay out between, tens of billions of pounds in
9 to 18 billion.
Exactly. So would the Treasury, how would they feel about this kind of what we jargonistically call downward pressure on the banking system at this current moment?
But, Stephen, it is the lesser of two evils, though, isn't it? Because the case on Friday, it could have been hundreds of billions. So, actually, to come down to 18 billion, she's probably breathing a sigh of relief. Yeah,
I think there was huge relief in the Treasury that the Supreme Court decided to go for this significantly smaller and much less generous option in terms of the scope of compensation. Because, that 44 billion bill for the banking system was something that people in the Treasury were very worried about. But I think there is a big problem here that, now, yes, that 44 billion is a lot of money, but given that people were effectively passing on a commission to their customers without telling them, I think lots of people who are affected by this are going to feel understandably furious when they're told that at most they can get £950. So, I think sigh of relief in the Treasury, but I think if you're in Downing Street, you're going to worry that this might become one of those running stories that sort of doesn't go away, where you have, lots of people who've been affected by this going, this is a disgrace.
Stephen and Cindy, thank you very much for the moment. Let's see what's coming up next.